What are you afraid of? When I was a little kid, I was afraid of the thing under the bed. I would run and jump up into my bed so that whatever was under there wouldn't reach out and grab me. And I think that fear lasted with me longer than it should have. I remember even in high school running and jumping on my bed to keep that thing from getting me. I don't worry about that anymore. I know there's nothing under my bed. But one of the things I am worried about now is flying. I don't know when that happened, because when I was a little kid, I loved to fly. It was so exciting to take off and land and to eat the neat little tray of food that they would give you in the airplane. But at some point, probably maybe when I had children, I started to realize that flying was scary, and every time we hit turbulence, I would grip the seat thinking maybe this was the end. So I'm really terrified to fly, and yet I do it. So anyway, I thought it would be fun to film at an airport, and I didn't want to drive all the way to Hartford, so I brought you to the little Goodspeed Airport in East Haddam. I don't think we'll be lucky enough to see any planes landing, but if one comes along, I'll show it to you. Anyway, fear. Fear is the focus in our gospel lesson today. Remember, last week in our gospel lesson, Jesus has just fed 5,000, maybe 10,000, maybe even 15,000 people. He had done this after he had been seeking time away. And so our gospel lesson here picks up on the rest of this story. Jesus finally gets his time away. He sends the disciples in a boat onto the lake. He sends the crowds away, and he goes and spends time with God in prayer. And then our story happens. It's late. The disciples had been in this boat from the time evening came. And we're told that at about the fourth watch of the morning, which is somewhere between 3 and 6 o'clock in the morning, Jesus finally comes to them. They've been in this boat, and it's been choppy. Maybe it's a storm. We don't hear that it's a storm, but the waves have been torturing the boat, we're told, and so they're probably tired, maybe a little bit frightened. Where has Jesus been all this time? And he comes walking to them on the water. Now, you and I would say, wow, what a miracle. He's defying the laws of gravity. But for the disciples at that time, it was more about defying the laws of humanity. Whomever could do this was not human. And even though they've seen Jesus feed maybe up to 15,000 people, they've seen him drive out demons, they've even seen him calm a storm already while they were in a boat in chapter 8 in Matthew. And so, but amazingly, their minds don't go to, hey, it's Jesus. It goes to a ghost, maybe a demon, a monster. They are afraid. There's fear number one. Jesus comforts them. He uses the words of God saying, I am. Take heart. It's I am. And Peter responds with, all right, if it's really you, let me come to you and do what you do. And this surprises me because Jesus says, come on out here. And Peter walks on the water, maybe only briefly, because he all of a sudden looks around and sees the chaos around him, and he becomes afraid. Fear instance number 2. And in that moment of his fear, he says, save me, Lord. And what does Jesus do? But he saves him. He reaches out a hand, and pulls him out of the waters into which he's sinking. So there are two instances of fear in our gospel lesson today. And so it made me think about fear and faith. And I think what we learn in this lesson today is that fear is a huge part of our faith. It's true that Jesus said, "Do not be afraid." But I don't think Jesus was saying that if you're ever afraid, you don't have faith. I heard once a story from Elizabeth Gilbert, and she talked about fear. She talked about how fear is necessary because fear keeps us safe. It helps us to know when we're walking into a bad situation or into a good situation. It can be a good thing for us to have fear. And yet she says the problem is when we're driving or flying an airplane, fear often likes to sit in the seat right next to us and whisper into our ear and tell us what to do. And too often we allow fear to sit there and really do the driving. And she said that she's learned that she needs to tell fear to sit in the back seat. It's not that fear isn't necessary, but it's that we shouldn't allow fear to be driving us. We need to hear the voice of fear, but then we still need to move forward. And so I liked that image of saying, "Hey, fear, get in the back seat." And I think as people of faith, we recognize that we're going to have moments of fear. We're going to be tired and exhausted, and we're going to come up with moments where we don't even know how to move forward. So I think we get it wrong when we say that faith is the opposite of fear. I think faith is just not allowing fear to be the primary driver of what we do. It says, get in the back seat to fear. The other thing that we learn from this gospel lesson is that sometimes we're afraid of how Jesus shows up. We think that we have a nice, neat package of faith, of religion, of Christianity. We have it all figured out, don't we? And sometimes, in fact, usually, Jesus surprises us and comes in ways that we least expect. In the same way he came walking on the water, and the disciples thought that perhaps he was something else, maybe even something evil, like a ghost. This is not unexpected because Jesus comes in surprising ways all the time. He came as a baby in a manger instead of a king on a throne. He ate with sinners and tax collectors, and he reached out to Samaritans. That's not what people expected the Messiah would do. And even more so, instead of coming triumphantly and defeating the Roman chokehold on Israel, he died on a cross, bringing something even greater: freedom from sin, freedom from the oppression that binds us of division, hate. So Jesus comes in crazy, unexpected ways, but we forget that. I think about my own call to ministry, Jesus calling me to pastoring a congregation, and I think, that's not me, Lord. I struggled with that for a number of years while in seminary, and then again when I was mothering my children and thinking, is it really time for me to go back to being a pastor? Jesus, is that you? Or think about the ELCA and our welcoming, finally, of LGBTQ members and leaders. So many people said, Jesus, is this you? There are times when Jesus comes in unexpected ways, and it brings fear into our hearts. That's part of faith. Finally, the last thing we can learn from this text about fear and faith is that when we get caught up in the weeds and the chaos and the sin and the oppression that seems just overwhelming, times now like coronavirus and political division, explosions in Beirut, and hurricanes where there's no power, and just a whole bunch of craziness. When we come into those chaotic times and all we can think of is, I'm afraid, we are welcome to cry out for help and to say, Lord, save me. And Jesus promises that he will provide. He will reach out his hand and pull us into safety, into faith again. I think about my fear of flying, and it reminds me of my grandparents who were also afraid to fly. They lived way up in Ohio when I was growing up in Florida. And one time they came to visit us. They rode a bus and came down to visit us. But every other time we were the ones that had to go to them. And so what happened is we didn't have a very close relationship because we didn't get to visit very often. All because they were afraid and were not able to put fear in the back seat and fly to us. Sometimes, church, I think we do that. We sit safely in our polity, in our construction of worship, in our way of always doing things, because we are afraid. We are afraid of this wild, crazy Jesus that comes to us in unexpected ways and calls us to do things that are scary. So I invite you to think about what in your faith makes you afraid. Is it standing up and being a worship leader? Is it advocating for the rights of someone that you don't understand or maybe don't agree with? Is it working together with another denomination to make a stronger ministry? What is it that makes you afraid? And what would it look like if we could say, hey, fear, sit in the back seat. I'm going to embrace this thing that Jesus calls me to, this unexpected thing. And I'm going to step out in faith. And if I get caught in the weeds, I'm going to cry out for help. Amen.